Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of breaking news to cover this morning. South Africa presented their case at the ICJ at The Hague, so we will break that down for you. This comes as the Houthis have stepped up their attacks, leading to a very dangerous situation in the Middle East. We had a debate last night between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley.
Yes.
We also had a Trump town hall. We have all of the highlights.
Lowlights, highlights, lights,
of
whatever.
those interactions. What does it mean? And of course, Saagar covered this yesterday. Chris Christie has now dropped out of the race. That could actually have some significant impacts in New Hampshire, so we'll talk about that as well. There are some significant developments in numerous Trump legal cases, some cutting in his direction, some cutting against him. We will break those down for you. Hunter Biden made a big surprise visit to Capitol Hill, and it led to some very interesting fireworks. We'll tell you about that. Saagar is taking a look at how Ron DeSantis invented affirmative action for Jewish people.
Yeah, oh, wow. Interesting.
Plot twist there.
Yes.
And I'm taking a look at some new reports revealing just stunning bias in media coverage of Israel and Palestine. So a lot to get to this morning.
Yeah, I'm really excited for all of that, especially to have two monologues back in the show. So that's very fun.
Right.
That's a reminder, by
First
the
time
way.
in a while.
You can sign up, breakingpoints.com, to become a premium member. We're currently soliciting premium member questions for our RFK Jr. focus group. It will be taking place tomorrow on the ground in Detroit. Our entire team will be there. So we've got a great number of people. They'll be voting for RFK Jr. and we want to hear from them. What do you guys want? Like, what are you looking for? Why do you support RFK? How strong is your support? To our knowledge, the first focus group really of its kind by a media organization, to be fair. So if you can help us out, support work like that, and a lot of other big plans we have for the election season, you can sign up right now, breakingpoints.com.
Indeed. All right. So let's get to the very latest huge developments in the Red Sea. You guys will recall that the Houthis have been basically blocking traffic through the Red Sea. The U.S. has formed this sort of very weak coalition, and a lot of countries haven't wanted to be involved with it, but the UK is standing strong alongside of us, and so the U.S. and British naval forces actually shot down 21 drones and missiles fired by Yemen-based Houthis on Tuesday towards the southern Red Sea. We have the CENTCOM announcement here. We can put this up on the screen. So the Houthi attack on international shipping, they say, on January 9th at approximately 9:15 p.m. local time, Iranian-backed Houthis launched a complex attack of Iranian-designed one-way attack UAVs, anti-ship cruise missiles, and an anti-ship ballistic missile from Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen into the southern Red Sea towards international shipping lanes where dozens of merchant vessels were transiting. 18 OWA UAVs, 2 anti-ship cruise missiles, and 1 anti-ship ballistic missile were shot down by a combined effort of FA-18s from USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, USS Gravely, USS Laboon, USS Mason, and the UK's HMS Diamond. This is the 26th Houthi attack on commercial shipping lanes in the Red Sea since November 19th. There were no injuries or damage reported. On January 3, 14 countries, including the U.S., issued a joint statement stating the Houthis will bear the responsibility for the consequences should they continue to threaten lives, the global economy, or the free flow of commerce in the region's critical waterways. So that is a bit of a threat there at the end. In terms of what the Houthis are saying, they said that in a statement that they attacked an American ship as part of a, quote, preliminary response to the U.S. shooting down 3 of its ships on December 31. In that incident, we killed 10 people. The Houthis carried out a joint military operation with a large number of ballistic and naval missiles and drones against a U.S. ship it accused of providing support to Israel. They go on to say the Yemeni armed forces continue to prevent Israeli ships or those heading to the ports of occupied Palestine from navigating in the Arabian and Red Seas until the aggression stops and the siege of our steadfast brothers in the Gaza Strip is lifted. So just making it very clear this is tied to what is happening in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah,
right now.
and unfortunately, though, the escalation ladder continues to climb. A lot of these Israeli ships are not even transiting. You know, most of the cargo at this point, it seems, in some 90% has been redirected around the Horn of Africa. The reason that the UK is involved here is actually it goes back to a lot of their historical dominance, colonialism in the region, and their historical pledge to protect some of this on top of the U.S. mission, Navy specifically, in order to protect the free flows of commerce. The big problem here, and we can go ahead and as we saw with the British Defense Secretary, is that by telegraphing that we will be bombing Yemeni territory now, we are going right back to the original problem where, look, I mean, I have no issue bombing the Houthis if they're going to fire on a U.S. flagged ship. The problem just comes back to will this actually stop the bombing? And what we've seen consistently through the Houthi campaign is that Saudi Arabia can drop, the entire arsenal that the U.S. supplied them with pretty sophisticated military. The
Hmm.
Houthis have no air power, but they were still capable of amassing all of these ballistic missiles, which were, really threatened Saudi territory and the Saudi military for quite some time. And it would only more likely lead to some sort of escalation in the waters in the Red Sea, which would only dramatically increase the insurance rates, the price of commerce. I mean, we're really stuck between a rock and a hard place because clearly the military action is tied to what's happening in Gaza. Now we say we're just not going to, we're not going to do anything about what's happening in Gaza. So now we're tied into this coalition. The real problem, I thought, with the coalition is that it's not just the US and the UK, which almost goes back to like some Iraq war thing. It's like France and all of these other countries, which have just as much of an incentive in order to defend commerce on the high seas. They don't want to join us in a military. I mean, honestly, Krystal, we had more military support in our anti-ISIS coalition than we do on something like this. It's extraordinary because frankly, there's a way more at stake whenever it comes to this than whatever the hell was going on in Syria at the time. So this, honestly, from a military perspective, strategic, this has been a disaster for us.
There is essentially no one in the region who has joined us. Bahrain is the only regional ally that is publicly involved. That's number one. Number two, some of the countries that originally said, all right, we'll help you out, backed down and did not want to be associated with this in any regard. Number three, I will not be the first to point out that the U.S. seems to be much more concerned about container shipping than they are about the Palestinian babies being massacred in the Gaza Strip. And number four, yes, they are between a rock and a hard place, as you put it, Saagar. It is a position completely of their own making. So as we covered previously in the week, there's all these leaks from the defense establishment and the intelligence establishment freaking out about the possibility of a regional war and warning that especially, the escalation with the Houthis, but in particular the escalation in Lebanon, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, that this does not end in a good place for the U.S., period. And yet nowhere in this coverage does it suggest the very obvious answer that all of these hostilities go away overnight if you have a ceasefire, and that the U.S. has a lot of say in whether or not there is a ceasefire. We know when there was even a temporary ceasefire, and this is a point that Dr. Trita Parsi has been making. We know that this is the case because these attacks slowed, in some instances completely stopped during that period of the temporary ceasefire. So while they're winging, oh my God, what do we do? And how do we deal with this? And we don't have this coalition isn't backing us. And maybe we've got to hit Yemen directly. They leave off the table the very obvious answer to avoiding a gigantic war that inevitably pulls us into it, which is to push Israel for a ceasefire using our immense leverage in the region. So I just mentioned we also have huge escalation. I mean, at this point, you can't say like, oh, it might be a multiple front war. The Israelis themselves are saying they're fighting a 7-front war and taking action on 6 of those fronts. So they are warning, the Israelis are now warning hospitals in Israel to brace for casualties as a result of the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Let's take a listen to that.
To put this in its proper proportion, Israeli hospitals have been working with the IDF Home Front Command to drill these scenarios for years. So the protocol of drilling it is not new. And they have to be ready for that kind of scenario because at any time we could have entered into a full-scale war situation with Hezbollah. The timing is, of course, relevant because we are facing continuous exchanges of fire with Hezbollah, and the scenario of this escalating into a much larger conflict is very much on the table. It's possible. So we don't know what the breaking point is. Okay, we have to be honest and say we don't know when that moment will come, when we're going from low intensity to high intensity, when it's when it's dozens of rockets or drones to thousands. Hezbollah can hit northern Israel with 10,000 rockets a day in a full-scale war situation. It can hit central Israel with at least 1,000 rockets a day in a full-scale war situation. We don't know when or if that moment will come, and it's absolutely the duty of hospitals and emergency responders and the IDF Home Front Command to make sure that if it does come, that they're ready.
Netanyahu, of course, has every incentive to expand this war, to keep the war going indefinitely, to try to have something that he can bring back to the Israeli people that he can call a quote-unquote victory, especially as he comes under increasing pressure within his own coalition and also from the Israeli public. And we have one more, yet another warning from a prominent official. Put this up on the screen. This is War Cabinet member Benny Gantz, who is saying the Lebanese government should think about whether they are Iran's front shield. If Hezbollah continues, we will act in southern Lebanon as we act in the northern Gaza Strip. This is not a threat to Lebanon. It is a promise to the residents of the north. And, there's a lot of language too, Saagar, that has made it very clear that one of the intentional goals of the action of the, assault on Gaza is not this quote unquote hunt for Hamas, but it's to show that they are so brutal to act as a deterrent to groups like Hezbollah. And so that's why from the beginning you've had this language of like, hey, we could turn Beirut into Gaza City. We could copy paste what we did in Gaza to Lebanon. That is part of the strategy here, is to be as destructive and as horrifying as possible so that, groups like Hezbollah and the Lebanese people react in horror to the idea that that could be done to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look through history, it's not exactly a novel military strategy. Certainly has worked, I guess, in the past. The problem that they have is that Hezbollah is not Hamas. These people, as he even lays out in there, got 1,000 rockets a day. Rockets are the least of their problems. They've got actual missiles that it would have to deal with. These are, missile defense systems and others. Already what's happening in the Red Sea that we originally opened with, Krystal, is a far more technologically advanced war than what's currently happening in Gaza. Gaza is actually much more of a, older style conflict. Yes, they have 21st century technology, but only on one side. In Hezbollah, where that's not what we're talking about at all. In some military analysts and others that I've looked at, including people who are pro-Israel, people who are warning, Jonathan Shanzer, we played on our Tuesday show, he would liken the Hezbollah military arsenal to that of a small European nation. So we need to understand that the parity of military capabilities and technology is so much higher. That was underscored on our Monday show when 100 IDF soldiers were wounded in a single day, the vast majority of them by Hezbollah. So that shows us that, we can have no real hot war, but the mere anti-tank missiles that they have and have been exchanging fire with the IDF have been enormously destructive. So the overall impact right now on global shipping, on the global situation and others is a level of immense precarity. And it also shows us one of the warnings, that there's been a lot of triumphalism. People have said, oh, see, nothing has emerged into a full-blown war. We are only 3 months removed from October 7th, and we're just not that far, frankly, into this conflict. Part of the reason why we were so critical, I guess, in the beginning, is because it was so clear, I would say October, 20th or so onward from the ground invasion. I'm like, okay, you have just now committed the same mistakes as Iraq. It took us 9 months to a year for us to reap the reward of our invasion. It took a long time before we really start to see the massive strategic fallout. I would honestly argue that most of what we're seeing today is continuing of that, and that's 20 years or so after they're removed. So when we think about, what the timescale is here and what they have opened themselves up to, this is just the beginning of the beginning. We really have no idea what the diplomatic situation, the military situation is. So I think it is a very, very dangerous moment here for the United States, specifically with regard to the global shipping standard, because what we can see there is that has the most potential to massively change and impact the overall U.S. economy. And look, you said, care more about shipping. To be honest, we should care more about shipping because that's what's going to affect us directly in our lives. That would actually massively impact the overall U.S. economy, the global situation, and that's what makes people care. That's what makes people be like, hey, what is going on here? Why can't I get X or Y or Z
it seems
from the grocery store?
Plenty of people care about the images of horror that they see coming out of Palestine.
It's about what actually
that is being funded by our taxpayer dollars. And if you don't care about that, you might care about the fact that you are radicalizing millions of people to absolutely hate the United States of America because of the 2,000-pound bombs that are being dropped on us.
But these are not concepts which directly affect us in the moment. What I'm saying is that, in general...
Clearly it does.
Well,
clearly there are lots of people who are very affected by it and
but
very
it's not the vast
concerned about
majority of the American public. All right, so the vast majority of the American public is definitely going to care if
the
prices
majority
go
of the
up
American public
or oil.
wants a ceasefire,
but not
for
enough.
exactly this reason, because they don't want to be party to atrocities.
There are things that I want. Then there are also the things that there are 100 things that I want. There's maybe one that I'm going to act the most on, right? Of that one, that's how most people think in terms of priorities. There are a lot of things on your priority list. Yes, majority of Americans want a ceasefire. I don't disagree with you at all. But if you were to look, let's say, at polling of what is most important to you, it's not even going to be what in the top 10.
If you ask people, do you care more about the babies who are being bombed in the Gaza Strip or shipping lanes in the Red Sea right now? What do you think they're going to choose?
Well, I would flip it and I'd say, do you care more about what you're paying, at the grocery store for oil and for that other thing, or for whatever's going on in a third world conflict, which doesn't affect you? I would absolutely say number one. I don't think I'm alone in that.
I mean,
and I think that bears out in our presidential election.
The number
and
of
everything
people
else.
who have said that foreign affairs is their top priority in this coming election is effectively unprecedented right now because of the concern of what's being done in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, but it's not, again, the economy is still going to be number one. I mean, I'm saying is in terms of what is actually impactful to people's lives.
If your number one concern is the freaking shipping lanes, then there's a very clear answer here that dovetails alongside the concern over the babies who are being massacred in the Gaza Strip, and that's a ceasefire. And that's left out of our government's calculation. There was reporting that people in the Biden administration, they don't even try to make this case to Joe Biden because he's basically so obstinately against it, period, end of story, that he's willing to risk a massive war in order to unconditionally support Israel. It's left out of the media context when these articles are written about oh my God, they don't know what to do and this is so bad and the military is really concerned about what's going to happen. That context is left out completely. The Houthis have put out statements saying, listen, we're upholding our part of the Genocide Convention and our obligation to not only not participate in genocide, which the U.S. is doing right now, but to try to prevent it. So that's the big picture here that I don't want to get lost, is that all of these various concerns, which are all important, I don't want to diminish, the cost that could escalate as a result of the Houthis' actions here. All of these various concerns are solved by having a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip.
No, I actually don't disagree with anything that you said at all. I'm more talking about in terms of how it would impact overall U.S. politics. And so I don't disagree in terms of the obfuscation of the way that we think and talk about the conflict and about our overall leverage of Israel. Actually, I'm totally in agreement. If anything, what we have signed ourselves up for is both unconditional support for Israel and an unconditional bearing of all of the costs, which is what drives me the most insane about the entire U.S. relationship with Israel. We have a piddly little country out in the middle of nowhere that somehow all of U.S. politics has to evolve around, including the U.S. military, which is nuts, when we think about it from a strategic position. If anything, you could make a case that Ukraine matters, and I don't even think that it matters more than Israel, and I don't even think Ukraine matters all that much to overall U.S. national security. So it's a difference in perspective, I think, the two ways that we're looking at it. But regardless, you generally arrive at the same conclusion, which is that the U.S. is not impacting the situation in Israel enough, both to its own benefit. There are humanitarian side effects to that as well. But the problem that I see right now is that we don't, with Biden in particular, and a lot of the overall U.S. establishments, they're so wholesale committed that they have not even allowed themselves to look outside of whatever was, exists within the Overton window of pre-October 7th. They're not updating their thinking and their language in this overall strategic situation. Frankly, you see the same, in terms of thinking about Ukraine. It's like everybody thinks it's like 1972 in the middle of the Cold War. It's like, no, we're living in a totally different global environment. And I think, post-October 7th, this is something that we're probably about to get to with the genocide trial happening right now at the ICJ. We need to really prepare ourselves for the fact that Israel is not the Israel of before. Maybe they're okay with that, but I don't think a lot of people in that country have grappled with that, and same with this country in terms of our relationship with
Joe
that.
Biden still thinks it's like 1970s Israel with Golda Meir as prime minister. And I mean, in some ways, as we've said before, and as Daryl Cooper always points out, like the right-wingers like Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they're the more honest narrators of what Israel actually is and what the goals really are. So there is a difference, obviously, between Netanyahu and, previous prime ministers who are actually interested in the Oslo peace process, et cetera. But a lot of the sort of bedrock direction of Israel has not really changed. It's just that the U.S. political class, and especially Joe Biden, has constructed some fantasy Israel that has really never existed in his head and certainly does not exist today. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.